You chase the partner who lives across the world, the job that's just out of your reach, or the project you secretly know won't work. Why? Because the near miss is a psychological safety net. This is the dark art of choosing failure to protect yourself from true investment. People who habitually pick the near miss do so for a reason that looks irrational on the surface, but makes brutal sense beneath the surface. On paper, the pattern reads like self-sabotage. A long-distance lover, a startup with no revenue model, a dream role that requires relocation you refuse to accept. But the pattern is not random, it functions as a defense strategy. By selecting options that are structurally unlikely to succeed, you ensure a kind of emotional insurance. If the relationship collapses, the job fails, or the plan fizzles, you can explain the outcome without blaming yourself. You invested energy, you tried, and external factors made it impossible. That explanation protects you from the real risk, the exposure that comes with fully committing and then losing something you cannot easily replace. The psychology behind this is ancient and simple. Human beings evolved to avoid ruinous loss. The brain favors strategies that minimize existential threat. In childhood, many people learned that love and safety were conditional, available only when they behaved a certain way or kept their needs hidden. When you carry that lesson into adulthood, you develop an internal rule. Never set up a situation where the other party can actually take you all the way. If you date someone across the ocean, the physical distance becomes an objective barrier. If you apply for a role that would require you to uproot your life, you can claim practical limits. If you build a startup around a product that requires capital you never intend to raise, failure looks like market forces, not personal limits. Each near miss preserves a part of you from being tested by true commitment. Look at 3 common scenarios to make this concrete. First, the partner who is always unavailable. Maybe they work in another time zone, maybe they refuse to move, maybe they insist they are not ready for deeper commitment. You choose them because their absence becomes a built-in excuse, as you can love without the accountability of day-to-day intimacy. When the relationship ends, you say, "We were never in the same place," and the emotional cost feels contained. Second, the job that is perfect if only X. You pursue a role that demands relocation, long hours, or full-time travel, then quietly sabotage interviews or never accept the offer. The job was a test you set up to avoid being judged on sustained performance. Third, the project that dies because of timing or funding. You pour effort into something fragile. When it fails for reasons you can point to: recession, investor exit, market change. Your competence stays intact because the failure looks systemic, not personal. These choices also preserve identity. If you never fully try, you remain a person of potential rather than one with an achieved life. Potential protects you from judgment. It allows you to be admired without risk. The near miss functions like a pause button on the harsh feedback loop of real life. People can praise your intent while ignoring the lack of follow-through. That praise feeds the inner narrative that you were always meant for greatness. You simply lacked the right circumstances. The downside is obvious. A life of near misses is a life of unclosed loops. The emotional energy that funds the fantasy never converts into assets, reliable love, deep skill, or durable success. There is also a secondary benefit for the psyche: control. Choosing a relationship or a job that will likely fail lets you be in a familiar role: the struggler, the romantic, the visionary. Those roles come with scripts that are easier to act out than the messy demands of full partnership or ongoing professional responsibility. When a relationship is long distance, you can perform devotion without negotiating chores, schedules, or conflict. When a job is conditional, you can project competence without facing the slow grind of actual results. These scripts let you keep the moral high ground. You can blame logistics, timing, or greed rather than examine whether fear of closeness held you back. Near misses also function as a protective rehearsal space. By repeatedly choosing options that fail, you keep a wound open but numb. You practice resilience in controlled doses, a breakup with an excuse, a startup that fails because you anticipated it would, a job that ends due to circumstance. Each failure trains your nervous system to expect loss at a distance. This prevents a single catastrophic event from overwhelming you. The trade-off is that you never allow yourself the full risk of building something strong enough to matter. Practice without stakes preserves skill but prevents mastery. To recognize the pattern in yourself, look for predictable markers. You prefer romance with built-in obstacles. You find excuses to delay accepting offers that require deeper engagement. You pick collaborators who lack follow-through, giving you the moral high ground if things go wrong. You feel relief when a partnership collapses because you secretly expected it to. Pay attention to the internal narrative you tell at each breakpoint. If you find yourself saying, "It was never meant to be," with a faint sense of relief, you are experiencing the safety of the near miss. Breaking the pattern requires an unusual combination of self-awareness and courage. First, you must name the defense. Call it what it is. A protective strategy learned in a context where vulnerability felt dangerous. Naming reduces the illusion that your choices are purely rational. Second, practice commitment in small, concrete ways that produce feedback you can tolerate. That means picking low-stakes experiments that nonetheless force you to finish. If you avoid intimacy, start by accepting a weekend visit without escape clauses. If you avoid career moves, take a short-term contract that requires presence for a month. These micro-commitments rewire your tolerance for risk by giving you manageable data points. Third, prepare a plan for when things feel risky. Have a support person you can call, a therapist, or a routine that grounds you. The near miss thrives on uncertainty. Structure kills it. Another useful tactic is to reframe failure as information rather than identity. When a job, project, or relationship fails, ask, "What did I learn? What choices did I make that helped or hurt?" The near miss allows failure to be an external event, but that externalization prevents learning. By interrogating your role honestly, you convert the protective pattern into adaptive intelligence. You stop blaming distance and start examining decisions. Finally, notice the paradox at the heart of the near miss. The strategy that protected you from loss also prevented you from building anything worth protecting. The person who avoids full investment may survive unbroken, but survives without accumulation. No shared home, no deep domain knowledge, no long-term partner. The near miss preserves a thin, fragile safety while denying the deep rewards of a life built on risk. If you want different results, you must choose differently. That means selecting options that are winnable because you will invest, not because they give you an excuse to preserve potential. If this analysis landed for you, if you felt the recognition of having chosen near misses to avoid real risk, please like, comment, and subscribe to The Fictionist. We explore how survival strategies from childhood shape our adult choices and how small changes in behavior and mindset can convert protective scripts into lives of real connection and durable achievement. The real reason behind the pattern of the near miss isn't laziness or lack of ambition, it is the deep, unspoken terror of vulnerability. True vulnerability means opening yourself to genuine risk, being loved and left, trying and failing, succeeding and being seen. For many people, that exposure feels unbearable, so instead, they build a life around effort that looks noble but is ultimately self-protective. They chase the dream that's slightly out of reach. They work tirelessly toward a goal that was never structurally sound. They perform sincerity while quietly ensuring that nothing permanent can take root. On the surface, it looks like dedication. Underneath, it's a way to stay emotionally safe while appearing engaged with life. To understand how powerful this defense is, Imagine someone who has been deeply disappointed or abandoned in the past. Maybe as a child they had a parent who praised effort but withheld affection. Maybe they learned early that love or approval could vanish without warning. The mind adapted by building a strategy. If I never depend fully, I can never be destroyed. As an adult, that translates into a compulsion to try hard, but only where failure is guaranteed. Every new project, relationship, or dream becomes another controlled experiment in effort without exposure. You can tell yourself, I gave it my all, but still stay safe from what feels like the lethal blow of real rejection. This avoidance of vulnerability also hides behind the performance of responsibility. These people often look hardworking, committed, and conscientious. They will show up early, over-prepare, and sacrifice comfort in the name of discipline. But beneath the surface, the work functions as armor. They are terrified of what happens after success, because success would require maintenance, presence, and the acceptance that now there is something to lose. If the relationship actually worked, they would need to show up daily, compromise, reveal flaws, and face conflict. If the business took off, they'd have to lead, manage, and risk collapse under their watch. By failing preemptively, they avoid the unbearable weight of that accountability. It's easier to grieve a failure than to manage a victory. Think about the person who always falls for the emotionally unavailable partner. They pour themselves into the relationship, listen, text, empathize, and wait. They tell friends how hard they've tried. But the choice of partner was never about connection. It was about protection. The distance keeps them safe from the one thing they actually fear, being known. If that partner were truly available, if they suddenly wanted to commit, the entire emotional system would panic. The illusion of safety would collapse. Vulnerability would no longer be theoretical, it would demand participation. And participation feels like danger. The same principle applies to ambition. The person who dreams of starting a company but never finishes the prototype. The artist who works endlessly on sketches but never exhibits their work. The graduate student who collects research but avoids publishing. All of them are trapped in the same pattern, the avoidance of the final step, the one that exposes them to judgment. They are addicted to effort because effort feels righteous and controlled. Results, on the other hand, are unpredictable. Results mean visibility. Visibility means exposure. Exposure means the potential for humiliation, rejection, or responsibility. And so they stay in motion without progress, perfecting the art of almost. At the heart of this avoidance is a form of emotional perfectionism. If you never actually complete something, you can never fail at it. If you never fully commit to someone, they can never reject you. The near miss keeps your self-image intact. You can always say, it wasn't the right time, or I gave it everything I had. You never have to say, it didn't work because I was scared. The ego stays unbruised. You preserve the fantasy that under the right conditions, you'd be unstoppable. But the truth is that the right conditions never arrive because your subconscious keeps picking situations that guarantee safe failure. The cost of this strategy, though, is enormous. The person who avoids vulnerability doesn't just miss out on risk, they miss out on depth. Real intimacy, real mastery, real fulfillment all require exposure. They demand the willingness to be hurt, embarrassed, or wrong. When you refuse that exposure, your life fills with rehearsals instead of performances, blueprints instead of buildings, almost loves instead of lifelong bonds. You live surrounded by the echo of what could have been, but nothing you can actually hold. To see how this pattern operates day to day, imagine two people in a relationship. One of them has a history of emotional avoidance. They're attentive, affectionate, and responsive, but only up to a certain point. Whenever conversations turn toward long-term plans, cohabitation, or emotional honesty, they find subtle ways to pull away. They'll say things like, I just need space to think, or I'm not ready for labels. They convince themselves that these are reasonable boundaries, but what's really happening is defensive withdrawal. They are managing exposure. The idea of total emotional transparency terrifies them because it implies dependence, and dependence feels like a trap. The same fear plays out in creative and professional life. Consider the employee who's brilliant at brainstorming but never volunteers to lead a project. They love ideation but dread execution. Leading would mean taking ownership, and if the project fails, they'll be exposed as fallible. So they hide behind creativity as a shield. Or think of the musician who writes songs but never records them, always saying, "They're not ready yet." The song is never ready because readiness would mean risk. They'd rather live in the comfort of potential than the pressure of reality. Avoiding vulnerability also protects against envy and comparison. If you never finish, you never have to see how your finished work measures against others. You stay pure in theory. There was always the illusion that your effort could have been brilliant if only you'd gone all the way. The near miss lets you exist in that protected fantasy, untarnished by competition or criticism. It is the emotional equivalent of keeping a priceless painting forever in storage so no one can find a flaw in it. But behind all these maneuvers is the quiet truth. The person doesn't actually believe they can survive the pain of loss or the responsibility of success. They see vulnerability as annihilation. They think if they're fully seen and then rejected, they'll disintegrate. Or if they succeed and then fail later, they'll never recover. That belief usually comes from early experiences where emotional exposure led to punishment, neglect, or abandonment. The mind concluded control equals safety. So as an adult, you control outcomes by ensuring they're predetermined. You never let the dice roll unless you already know the result. True change starts with reinterpreting vulnerability. Vulnerability isn't the opposite of strength, it's the measure of it. Being open doesn't mean being naive. It means accepting that loss and disappointment are part of life, not proof of your inadequacy. You can fail and remain whole. You can be rejected and still retain worth. The protective shell of near misses begins to crack when you internalize that truth. The only way to grow into genuine fulfillment is to step into the uncertain space you've spent years avoiding. So if you find yourself in that loop, working hard, caring deeply, but never crossing the finish line, start asking harder questions. What would it mean if this actually worked? What would success require from me emotionally? What would I have to risk? You'll notice that the fear you've been avoiding isn't really about failure. It's about exposure. Once you name that fear, it begins to lose power. You can experiment with vulnerability in small doses. Say yes to the date that scares you, publish the project you've been hiding, ask for feedback before you feel ready. Each act of openness chips away at the illusion that safety and avoidance are the same thing. And if this reflection resonates with you, if you recognize that you have been performing effort to avoid exposure, then like, comment, and subscribe to The Fictionist. This channel exists to dissect the psychological defenses that shape our daily lives, not to shame them, but to understand their origins and transform them into tools for genuine growth and connection.